Start rolling here. All right, I want to welcome everyone to this first introduction to the Noahide laws. First of all, I want to give a big thank you to Ray Peterson for everything he's done for Noahide Nations, everything he's done for Noahides over the last number of years. Also, thank you to Rabbi Blumenstiel giving me, this opportunity to hopefully give over the material, that he put together, which I've gone through a good part of it. Very well done, very, extremely thorough. So I want to just, also preface by saying that big honor, it's a big honor for me that, the people out there, want to learn the Noahide laws, want to be a part of things, want to be part of a bigger global initiative, as it is. And I always say that, it's tremendously inspiring, to see either non-Jews who want to learn what it means to be a non-Jew, even if they don't go through conversion, right, as well as Jews who go through conversion, because they both go through, go through quite a bit. So it's interesting if you look at, the Noahide laws in general, which we're going to speak in depth as we go along. But if we look at the laws in general, you wonder over here why the laws themselves don't be codified in the Code of Jewish Law, right? It's something that, so many Noahides coming out of the woodwork, so to speak, and, wanting to learn what it means to be a non-Jew, right? What the purpose of a non-Jew in this world is without conversion. So no one really, could have predicted this, 70, 80 years ago. The tremendous resurgence, certainly as well. And we understand also people made the claim, and people made a lot of false claims, tremendous amount of false claims about what Noahide is, or Noahide-ism, or Noism, is, and mostly the idea that, well, it's a Christian thing. It's a made-up thing. It's only by the rabbis. Well, isn't there a mitzvah in the Torah to listen to the Kohanim in every generation, says the book of Deuteronomy. Right? So the Talmud speaks about the Noahide laws. Probably people have an issue with the rabbis, with the Talmud. We'll speak about that in the introduction. This is the only preface. Right? But the idea is that it's a fence. It's a fence, an academic category of Torah law. But it is Torah law. It's extrapolated from Torah law. Now, I made the statement a while ago that really it's rabbinical, but yeah, it's extrapolated from the Torah. Now, why did I say it's rabbinical? Because someone goes, hey, where does it say in the Torah? Where does it say in the Torah, the Noahide laws? We don't see anything specific. Oh, you say the Rambam. The Rambam brought it down. The Rambam's a person. Like, what does the Rambam know? God forbid. Right? So, 100% is extrapolated, we're going to see. It's extrapolated from the Torah. And we're going to see where it comes from. But there's an idea that we want to, in the early 20th century, 21st century, there's been an unbelievable trend. Right? And that is that you have more non-Jews coming out of the woodwork, as we mentioned, interested in learning what it means to be a non-Jew, which makes clear what the prophet says, that in the future non-Jews are going to come to a Jew, they're going to pull on the strings, on the tzitzis, and what are they going to say? Teach me Torah. I want to learn Torah. I don't want to convert. I don't need to convert. Right? Isn't it true? If God wanted everyone to be Jewish, they would have been. But they're not. So obviously non-Jews have a purpose. We spoke about that in great depth. By the Ramchal and Derech Hashem spoke about that a lot. So now we have a tremendous interest over here. And what do we see? Right? The whole purpose over here is to provide people with a proper understanding of what the Noahide laws are. Unfortunately, there's a lot of improper understanding. Total improper understanding. Coffman's law is you give someone a little bit of knowledge and they abuse it. You know what they say, you know a little bit about a lot of different things. That means you know everything about nothing. So there are a lot of people out there, and I'm not going to go into, I'm not going to get into it because I'd be here till tomorrow, and no one's going to stay, not even Ray. Right? No one's going to stay. But there is an issue, and has been an issue. Right? And the issue is that these laws have not been hit over properly. Right? It's been a hodgepodge. Major hodgepodge. So now comes along, Rabbi Blumenstale puts it together, soup to nuts, proper sources, and understanding what we're really supposed to do. What non-Jews are supposed to do. Right? So, even if someone, maybe, they want to go further, they want to convert, they want to explore, let's say, what it means to be a Noahide. You gotta understand what it means. There's a lot of backgrounds. And I always say it's more important to know the background than really to understand, the law itself. People are gonna say that's crazy. You gotta know what the law says. You're right. But even knowing what the law says, why? What's the purpose? I always say this in my classes to converts, that, you're going to get a lot of detail. Torah's got plenty of detail. What I'm obligated to do. But the Torah doesn't give me a lot of explanation. A lot of it is God spoke to Moshe. God spoke to Aaron. God spoke to both of them. Right? We do give reasons. The Rambam wrote the Moreh Nevuchim, Guide to the Perplexed. Try and understand where the laws come from. And a lot of times God said it. 80% of the Torah doesn't make sense. But see, the Noahide laws are different. Why the Noahide law is different? They're different because they make rational sense according to the Torah. Right? At least the 7 laws. There are about 70 altogether, 60, 70. Right? But they make sense according to the Torah. Don't steal, don't kill. Right? Don't do idolatry. These things make sense. So non-Jew's going to get upstairs after 120 years. God says, hey, how come I didn't keep my Noahide laws? Like, what are you talking about? You never taught me that. Where was I supposed to know it? God says, well, these things are obvious. They're obvious over here. What, you didn't know you weren't supposed to kill? Oh, that's different. Euthanasia, come on. Person was, put them out of my misery. They're suffering. What about stealing? What'd you do with the IRS? Oh, that's different. That's different. Uncle Sam takes 35%. So, a lot of things are obvious over here. Right? But we're going to go into detail. People say, oh, it's only 7 laws. Really? Why don't you wake up and smell the coffee? Why don't you properly learn? They're not just 70 laws. And I would say, and we're going to speak about this, I don't know if it's part of the curriculum or not, but I'm going to speak about it anyway. The idea that there are moral laws. Moral laws mean that I would say, maybe a non-Jew is not obligated, right? Not part of the Noahide laws, but as a moral imperative, they're liable. Because it takes away from them being a proper non-Jew. You tell me I'm not liable. I'm not going to get zapped for it. I'm not going to get punished for it. You're right. But is this a good thing for me? Or is it not a good thing for me? Right? So we're going to see. We're going to see. There are a lot of issues. There are a lot of things that will be clarified. We're going to take it step by step. A lot of things. Just want to point out, this is just a preface, by the way. Speaking about where the Noahide laws are derived from. What a Ger Toshav is. Even though there's no Ger Toshav today. Daily prayer. Torah study. Shabbos. Right? Non-Jews aren't allowed to keep Shabbos. The holidays. And other issues. Jewish and non-Jewish foods. Gender relations. Pre-marriage and marriage. Conception and contraception. Abortion, circumcision. Wow, this looks like a lot of fun. A lot of interesting topics over here. Theft and robbery, kidnapping, personal inquiry, striking a Jew. suicide, homicide, vigilantism. There's a lot of interesting things there, right? Also, we may, after a short while or maybe long while, there are philosophical issues, theology, as we would call it. Man, reward, and punishment. Could speak about that for days. The soul, the afterlife, Messiah, redemption. We could be here, forget a year. It's been a number of classes just on that. The Messiah, right? Prophecy, inspiration. Plenty of things, right? Plenty of things we're going to keep busy with. So that's by words of preface. Now, the introduction over here is, we're going to start by saying that there are a lot of things within Judaism that are tremendously misunderstood. Right? Tremendously misunderstood. And you take a look at Christianity, you look at Islam, you look at other, so-called religions, and what do they all say? We're true. We're number one. Believe in us, otherwise you're going to fry in hell forever. What does Judaism say? Judaism says, no, not at all. Non-Jew wants to have a portion of the world to come. Okay, as long as they keep what they're supposed to keep, that's fine. Now, does that mean they have to keep what a Jew keeps? Certainly not. We don't say convert or die. It's not a Jewish concept. Now, people may say, as a major misconception, we're going to see how far this goes, that they'll say, you know what? Jews only care about their own. We don't care about non-Jews. And they're going to cherry pick different places in the Talmud to show specifically how much we don't care about non-Jews. When I say cherry pick, I mean they take things out of context. Very much out of context. So, looking at it from the outside, looking in, what does Judaism look like? And secular Jews will say this also. It's all about minutia of Jewish law that is obscure. Really? You can't wear, a suit jacket that's made of wool and linen. Come on, what's the reason? I don't know. It's a chok. If the law doesn't make sense. Laws of kashrus. Milk is kosher, meat is kosher. I put meat and milk together and I cook it. It's forbidden. I have to have separate dishes. And where's that written in the Torah? Right? Where's that written in the Torah? I'll tell you where it's extracted from. They'll say, come on. People are, there's no problem with trichinosis. I had someone tell me. I was in a kosher restaurant, and they said, why do we keep kosher anyway? This Jew tells me. There's no problem with trichinosis. So I said, really? That's so interesting, but that's the only way to keep kosher. And by the way, you're eating a bagel. Does a bagel have anything to do with trichinosis? I don't think so. And they looked at me like, you fanatical nut. You nut job is at the pass of salt. They got a little bit offended because it took the wind out of their sail. Because trichinosis had nothing to do with conscience. Zero. So there's a lot of law. Tremendous amount of law where people think, Judaism, vengeful gods. Right? It's all about, God's going to zap you. God's going to get you. What about God of compassion? What about God has tremendous amount of compassion? You're right. There's reward and punishment. 100%. That's the way you look at it. If I don't do this, I'm going to get zapped. God wants just to zap everyone. That doesn't sound like so much fun. They're like, shove and eat the matzah. You got 35 seconds to eat 25 pounds of matzah, and you have to whistle Dixie at the same time, which I try and make all my kids do after eating all that matzah, right? Imagine it's like all stuck to the roof of your mouth. You can't do it. It's actually pretty funny. Anyway, I digress here, right? But how do they look at it? They look at it as a vengeful God. There are many, many misconceptions. There's been almost a 2,000-year campaign, marketing, persecution by guess who? I'll give one guess. Final Jeopardy. What is the church? Sought to replace the original Torah with their own idolatry. Makes perfect sense. We're going to look at Jeremiah chapter 30, New Covenant. We're the ones. It's going to be us. But see, you didn't read the beginning of the chapter. You didn't read the beginning of that chapter. The beginning of the chapter says you got to go back to the old covenant. I want you to make the old covenant stronger. So why is it called the new covenant? can't be a real new covenant because you can't go against what Moshe Rabbeinu says. Doesn't the Torah tell me you're not allowed to add and subtract to the Torah? Nod your head. That's what the Torah says. So if you can't add and subtract, so how do you have a new covenant? Logically, internal logic. God says, listen to Moshe Rabbeinu. He's my trusted servant. So God says in front of 3 million people. And he says, Moshe Rabbeinu is my most trusted. And if he's my most trusted, you got to listen. And if you got to listen, you can't contradict him. And he can't contradict anything in the Torah, not Moshe himself. He's a scribe. So Moshe Rabbeinu is a scribe. And that's what he does. So how do we have a new covenant? Oh, question. But they cherry pick. So why does it say new covenant? Very good. That's a good question. But it doesn't mean a whole new covenant. It means that internal logic. So what do the Christians do? So the Christians have subjected the Jews to persecution, exile, torture, death. Yeah, plenty of things. Jews forced into ghettos. They can't teach. They can't learn Torah. They can't print it. That's why before the destruction of the Second Temple, before they got into exile, they wrote it down. They wrote things down. Otherwise, it would have been forgotten. And guess what? It would have been. Because it was only really supposed to be passed down orally. Oh, but the rabbis understood. If that would be the case, no one's going to remember it. Because everyone's going different directions. Right now. So, Jewish and non-Jewish interactions weren't tolerated. Totally not tolerated. They accused the Jews of all kinds of being separatist, aloof, no different than Haman. Mr. Haman himself, the book of Esther. What did Haman come and say in front of Ahasuerus? These Jewish people, they don't eat the same foods. You know, you touch their wines, got spiritual cooties. In my language, spiritual cooties. They're not allowed to touch it. Because we're afraid they're going to use it for libation, idolatry, whatever. They're different than we are, for the same Jewish anti-Semites say. They'll say, be like us, Moshe Mendel said. Be a Jew in the house, do it, be like everyone else outside. But what does that cause? Assimilation. Intermarriage. But that's the accusation. The accusation is they're separate. They have their own laws. They do their own things. So what they do, they locked us in the ghetto. That was the best thing that could have happened. Why? Because once Napoleon came and unlocked the ghettos, they all intermarried. They're all assimilated. Be with everybody else, terrible. Because that's what happened. I had someone come visit a neighborhood I lived in many years ago. Secular Jew, they look around, they see all these ultra-Orthodox Jews, big hats, long coats, short coats, long coats, etc. All these things. And they say, wow, it's like being in a ghetto. I go, I know, it's great. Isn't it? That's what saved the Jewish people. 100% saved the Jewish people. So there have been all these persecutions. So therefore, that was the norm up until about 70 years ago. Once yet after the Holocaust. So Jews have had unbelievable religious freedom. They've never seen anything like it. Right? For the past 2,000 years. There's more Torah being learned today than in the time of the Second Temple. Now, obviously, it's not the same level. I don't think it's the same level by any stretch. Right? But it's more Torah being learned today than ever. So now we don't have oppression. Remember, the Talmud was censored. Also, Talmud was burnt. Didn't allow people to learn. Right? They didn't want them to learn. But what the Greeks by Hanukkah? Speak about Hanukkah. The Greeks by Hanukkah. Yeah, they also made decrees. But what was the worst decree they made? They wanted them to be just like us. They wanted us to be like, go to their gymnasiums, go to their dances, go to their coliseums, go to their universities, do all these things. And what's that a recipe for? Absolute disaster. Intermarriage. Assimilation. Right? So, you got persecution on the one hand. You can't learn Torah. It's forbidden to learn Torah. You learn Torah, you do circumcision, we're going to kill you. So, there's been persecution all around. All over Europe, soaked with Jewish blood. Right? You have pogroms, persecutions in the last 70 years. Since the Holocaust, greatest freedom in the history of Jewish people. Not to mention the state of Israel. Right? But we're not going to go there. Point is that They're allowed to learn Torah freely. Right? That's been an unbelievable thing. I don't think there's any question. So now we come to the question, okay, what about non-Jews? You're going to say, oh, we've never had anything to do with non-Jews. So why is the Talmud talk about Noahide? Anyone who tells you, by the way, that Noahide's a made-up thing, there's no such thing. Talmud says it a number of places. Number of places. I mean, not so many, but there are a number of places. Right? So what do they say? They're lying, obviously. And they're saying, oh, we don't have connection to non-Jews. But even the source, they say, we're going to see how they cherry pick. And they're going to say, you know what? Who would they say against non-Jews? But I always say, Coffman's law. Read the context. Understand the context. See what's going on. You may not like the answer. But if you cherry pick and you say, oh, look, this is going against non-Jews. This is going against non-Jews. Yeah, there's a lot of questions. And, I answered a lot of these questions. It's an octa on controversial issues. In a number of videos, long laundry list. We're going to see a few of them. But I haven't been able to speak about this for the past 2,000 years. Right? It wasn't relevant. Non-Jews want to learn about their own laws without going through conversion? What are you kidding? Why would anyone want to do that? Jews are getting persecuted left and right. No, I'll pass. I'll take Christianity. I'll take Islam. I'll take something else. I'm not going to go with the Jews. They're getting slaughtered. Throughout history, Jews are getting slaughtered left and right. The United States, why hasn't come to the forefront? Who in the world's going to, you talk about the Inquisition, the Inquisition in Spain, kiss the cross or die. That was the choice. So many died. A lot of people kissed the cross and they assimilated out. Some became Marranos, B'nai Anusim, as they're called, right? People who were secret Jews, etc. But the Jews are getting slaughtered left and right, pogrom after pogrom. So the non-Jews are going to come out and say, oh yeah, I'm going to join. Let me learn by the Noahide laws. Let me see what it means to be a non-Jew. They're going to die also. People don't want to die. Okay, let the Jews die. Okay. I'll take fantasy. I'll take Christianity. No problem. We're good. So why do you think these laws have never been out there for so long? Who's going to join? Who's going to be interested? Nobody. It's only recently you can discuss this, in the world. You not get persecuted. Right? So it comes along Mount Sinai. What happened at Mount Sinai, we all know. Torah was given to the Jewish people in front of 3 million people. Right? 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60. Not including women and children. It's about 3 million people. Guess what? No other nation makes such a claim. It's either, Muhammad's flight from Mecca to Medina. Before that, like nothing ever happened. JC, same thing. All the miracles in front of a few people. Comes along the Torah only claim. No one ever makes such a claim. I remember I was in South America, in Chile, and I had these Mormons, biggest group of Mormons outside of Salt Lake City. And they come to me and, and finally, I asked them so many questions they didn't have answers for. They finally said, Mormonism, John Smith, they found this Book of Mormon in a cave, 200 years. They're like, patting themselves on the back, like, oh, what a great answer. 200 years. Like, oh, I got a better one. What's that? Did you ever read Revelation of the Torah? Exodus chapter 19. 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60, not including women and children. In the vernacular, that's about 3 million people. God spoke to the Jewish people. Everyone agreed. Christians agree. Muslims agree. Right? Most of the world agrees. God spoke to us. Right? So you're going to say, oh, but we're not chosen anymore. We're not this, we're not that. Doesn't matter. Right? But no one makes such a claim. So I told these Mormons, they weren't the brightest guys. Right? But I told them, I said, 3 million people. God spoke to the entire nation. The entire nation. I didn't go to the Midrashim, nothing. God spoke to the entire nation. God spoke to the entire nation. If he spoke to the entire nation, doesn't that beat your little 2-bit story about John Smith in 200 years? 200 years finding the book in a cave? I think my story trumps you. Checkmate. That was it. So what happened at Mount Sinai? Sinai, God gives the Torah to the Jewish people. Up until Mount Sinai, the Ramchal says, in Derech Hashem, the Ramchal says, by the door of flood, the generation that dispersed, Really, that was the time for people that want to join the Jewish people with Abraham. But God had mercy up until Mount Sinai. Non-Jews could have joined. They could have joined and been part of the Jewish people. But at that point, once God gave the Torah, it's over. God sealed the covenant between the Jewish people. That was it. He sealed the covenant between him and the Jewish people. Now, you're going to say, okay, that was the main covenant. True. But isn't it true there were other covenants? Wasn't the first agreement between God and man. We see God established a covenant with Adam, covenant with Noah, right? Covenant with Abraham. So there are two ideal relationships over here with God. One of them is to be a Jew, and a person can convert if they want to be a Jew, right? Which is called Judaism. That is governed by the covenant of Mount Sinai. What's the other one known? It's known as Covenant of Noah and Adam, known as the Noahide covenant. So there are two covenants. Now a non-Jew could decide they want to go according to the Noahide law, be part of the Noahide covenant, or they could decide, they want to be a Jew. They want to be a Jew, good. They have to go through conversion. They have to learn, right? All the minutiae, there's a lot to learn. A lot to learn by Noahide also, we're going to see. People think it's, it's 7 laws, it's cut and dry. Yeah, let's see. Now, what does the Torah stress? Torah stresses action. Now, you can tell me, there's a lot of Jewish law. There's a lot of law, true. But there's a lot of philosophy. There's a lot of Jewish philosophy as well. But see, we don't really care about philosophy. We have to try and understand to the best of our ability, what the Torah wants from us. But the Torah doesn't want you to overthink. The Torah wants you to invent the wheel. The Torah wants you to act. That's what the Torah wants. Belief in God or principles, not enough. There are principles we do have to believe. Right? That Jews have to believe in the 13 principles of faith by Maimonides. Now, some of them also may apply to non-Jews. But what's the difference? The difference is about action. It's about doing something. It's about performing God's will in the world. Now, you asked me the $1 million question. And the $1 million question is, how do we know? How do we know God's will? How do we know God's will? Well, didn't he reveal it? He revealed it on Mount Sinai. He told Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it. He made a book manufactured by himself, the most popular book ever sold. It's called the Bible. Right? Most popular book. But God tells us what we're supposed to do through his prophet Moshe. Right? Through Moshe. And how do we do all that? How do we know what he wants? It's through his commandments. Now, both covenants include mitzvahs, which are divine. They come from God himself. And we'll see as we go along how they're extrapolated from the Torah. And according to the Jewish covenant, there are 613 mitzvahs. Right? Not all we can do. Don't live in a land, if you're not a Kohen, etc. So probably about half or so, or less than half probably we can do today. Well, there are 613 commandments. And they're all divine laws. It wasn't a committee of 4 plus a redactor. Right? We're not going to even go into the 1,000 documentary hypothesis. It's written by God. Right? Given over by God. The Moshe passed it down to us. Now, what about the other covenant? What about the non-Jews? What about the Noahide covenant? There are 7 categories of mitzvahs or commandments, which include about 70 mitzvahs altogether. Some say it's less, right? Some say 65, 60, 68, whatever, right? Which includes about 70 mitzvahs, let's say. Right? And we're going to see that really this Adam Noahide covenant or Noah covenant, where does it really stem from? Mount Sinai. They didn't just make it up on their own. It comes from Mount Sinai. We're going to have to see where this is learned out. So there's an obvious question. There are a lot of laws. Tremendous amount of laws over here. why don't we just say, forget about laws. Maybe have only a few laws, and we'll have moral laws. Ethics, as they're known. Now, doesn't the Torah combine both? The Torah is law. We have obligations to do certain things. Not only that, they're moral law. There's ethics. In ethics are moral principles, but they have very broad applications. But the problem is, even if the values are held, interpretation easily becomes subjective. Right? In the secular world, we have such a concept. It's called moral relativism. Right? That means morality is relative. That it can change over time. According to Judaism, morality doesn't change. It doesn't change. It's not subjective. First of the 13 principles of faith of Maimonides. Right? God is absolute. God doesn't change. God is not fickle. Morality doesn't change. It's absolute. So laws, though, have defined guidelines. Even though the laws in the Torah don't tell me very much. They just say, do this, don't do that, but we don't have any definition. That's why you need oral law, without getting into all that. But ethics, what do I need by ethics? They need to impose structure, preserve meaning, but ethics needs, ethics over here needs law, right? And law needs ethics. So the law without ethics, meaningless. Right? That has to be reason behind it. So we can say it's divine, but we have to try to understand why. But we want to preserve it. So the question is, so if you want to tell me that, so what is Judaism exactly? What is Noahism? Exactly. Is it all about law? Or is it about love? Because if the covenant is motivated by love, now if we're going to be touchy-feely over here, mushy-gushy as I would call it, so it's going to be motivated by love, that's a great thing. While we're playing our guitars, they've been smoking a little bit of grass, singing Kumbaya, that's great. We're going to have a great time. Unbelievable time. So that'd be the case. If it's really motivated by love, why do we need law? What's the purpose of law? Because creation itself isn't that the ultimate act of love? Right? We're going to see. Why did God create the world? What's the purpose of creation? So Ramchal says in Derech Hashem, which we're going to see over here, and that is God created the world because God is amazing. God wants to show his goodness to all his creatures. So that means they did it out of love. You know why? Because God is absolute. God is infinite. God has no needs. If God has no needs, then he couldn't create the world for himself. He doesn't need the world. He can run through a black hole, can have a lot of fun, can play with the stars, the moon, Saturn, juggle all the rings. Have a lot of fun over here. So why did he create the world? He doesn't need the world. Technically. I mean, if he wants to be king, he should have subjects. But technically, God doesn't need. He really doesn't need over here. So why did he do it? Because all God's actions for the sake of our good. It's an act of love. If it's an act of love, does that include non-Jews also? Now you might say, isn't law and love opposite things? No, if I love something, well, it's not going to necessarily be based in law. Right? It sounds like a contradiction. So again, this goes back to the church. And how did the church portray the Torah? Portray the Torah's covenant of law. What did the church say about themselves? We love people. It's all about love. The Torah is all about minutia. Let me not spell that. Minutia. That's what it is. All this law that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But see, the Torah looks at love and law as two sides of the same coin. Because if a person doesn't have any restraint, boundaries, or guidance, love is destructive. Smothering. Also untempered justice. Terrifying and unbearable. But law tempered by love, and vice versa, is an ideal formulation. Give an example. Torah tells me Leviticus chapter 19. Torah says that you should be holy because God is holy. Very good. What does that mean? Difference of opinion. Rashi says it means stay away from forbidden relationships, immorality. Ramban over there says, you know what it means? It means that even though there are things that are permissible, you're allowed to eat, you're allowed to drink, you're not allowed to be a glutton, you're not allowed to be overweight, you're not allowed to be an alcoholic. You tell me, but I make kiddush Friday night, Shabbos day. I'm going to drink wine, right? I can use grape juice also, but let's say you're going to drink wine. It's okay. If you want to drink wine, between meat and fish, you have a little Chaim, you have something to wash out your mouth, some brandy, some scotch, something, maybe some wine. Does that mean I should drink the whole bottle? Or 3/4 of a bottle, half a bottle? What's that? Right? So in other words, even though there are things that are permissible, they can get abused. But God allows it. You're right. Who says I should eat a 96-ounce steak 3 times a week? Who says that? Nobody. Eating meat, not good for you in general. Right? Unhealthy. But, I like meat. I want to eat meat. Very good. But it's unhealthy. So even if it's permissible, there are limitations. Right? That's the point over here. Tempered by love. Love tempered by law. So you can't abuse things. It can't be destructive. Can't be without restraint and, abounded. Thank you, Jews hate to hear this. There's reward and punishment. There's a limit to what you can do. Right? There are things that are clear, that are forbidden. I think otherwise. Okay, so tell me why the Torah is not true. Doesn't matter. I just think otherwise, and I'm going to live the way I want to. Okay? That has nothing to do with Torah. It has nothing to do with showing that the Torah is not true. So what do the mitzvahs do? God gives us the ability through structure, expression of ethics, underlying ethics, beliefs, and values of God's Torah. Now, what happens when I keep Torah mitzvahs? What ends up happening? We do what God wants. But it's more than doing what God wants. We're helping God in creation. We're fixing ourselves up. We're doing chesed. We're doing acts of loving kindness. We're doing other mitzvahs I'm obligated to do, even if I don't fully understand what I'm doing. Right? If I take a lulav, we'll speak about sukkahs. I take a lulav and I shake it in all directions. I'm showing God's dominion above and below. A lot of Kabbalistic intention over here. Forget Kabbalah. You're shaking the lulav back and forth, but you're showing God's dominion in the world. So there are ways to connect to Him. We might not have thought about this, but it's a way to connect all the mitzvahs. So therefore, they have to be studied. They have to be understood. They have to be performed with unbelievable joy. Jews say that every day. Idu es Hashem b'simcha. Serve God with great joy. So that means we're going to sing and dance a little bit. More of my Hasidic side here coming up. No matter what we go through. That's what we have to do. Now also, if we look at it a little bit metaphysically, we'll see it's the rectification of God's creation. That we draw light of God into the world and bring it close to perfection. What does that mean in vernacular? It means the following. When I do something, hopefully positive, I bring out God's light. You know, say, come on, speak to me in English. What does that mean? It means that it has a special influence in the world, even if I don't see it. But more than that, it has an influence on me. Because I have the ability to draw close to God. Bringing the sacrifice, people think, oh, it's medieval, it's archaic. Why would anyone bring a sacrifice? Says the Vilna Gaon of Elijah Vilna more than 250 years ago. Before he died, he said one thing I wanted to see is what someone looks like before and after they bring a sacrifice. So let's say someone sinned, and if they sin, they have to bring a sin offering, and that animal's going to get killed in front of them, but that animal should have been them. Should have been them. Now, what's the word for sacrifice in Hebrew? Korban. What does the word korban mean? What's the root of the word? Kufresh beis. The word karov, to draw close. So a person brought the sacrifice, oh, it's medieval, it's archaic, bringing animals sounds like voodoo and who knows what, and idolatry, and all that. You can't bring sacrifices today. True, we don't have a temple, and even we wanted to bring, the Arabs will stop us, the police will stop us, never going to happen. Never going to happen. But even so, if a person understood they were supposed to be killed, by that animal. They were supposed to be that animal. And they see that was really supposed to be them. Says the Vilna Gaon, that person looks different. Because you have to remember, they had to take this animal, they had to bring it, it cost a lot of money, going to waste a lot of time, to get to Jerusalem, whatever. But that animal's killed instead of them. You have to say, well, the animal deserved to do that. Nothing. But God says you do a certain sin, this is what you have to do. This is the process you have to go through. But imagine if that person thought that was himself. Says the Vilna Gaon, unless the person's heart is hard as a rock, then what's going to happen? Then they won't change. Then it won't make any impression at all. But if the person's a thinking person, you're going to see that animal, the blood squirting all over the place. We're not going to get gross here. What ends up happening? Yeah, it has an effect. Totally has an effect. Now, we mentioned before, the Torah is a system of law. But there is theoretical law, there's practical law. So there are penalties. The Torah says clear. The Torah says, how do you know there's a right and wrong? That's what you think. No, that's what the Torah says. The Torah says in the second paragraph of the Shema, you do the right thing, you get reward. You get rain, you have sustenance, everything will be good. You do the wrong thing, there's hell to pay. You go against me, you're going to pay. You're going to pay the price. Now, that's black and white. It says all over the place. You don't do this, you get punished. You don't do this, you get punished. So it's clear. Right? Now you want to say, how do I know it's true? How do I know, God did, okay, that's a different issue, but that's not what they're saying. Right? But there are penalties for violation. Some more severe, some less severe. We're going to discuss. We're going to go through the Noahide law. And some things are more severe, less severe. But again, the discussion over here is going to be purely theoretical. Why? Because you're going to say, okay, if you can't kill someone today anyway, I don't have a temple in Jerusalem, there's no Sanhedrin, can't drag them there anyway, even if I wanted to. Nonetheless, why are we told over here the penalty is transgression? If they're not going to get it anyway, what's the point? To show it's severe, to show the severity. Because if it's got a light penalty, we understand the lesser transgression. Something more severe. Okay. So then we can determine, what the punishment's going to be. Now, when we talk about penalties in general, now studying the Noahide laws, right, there are many things that a Noahide will be liable for death penalty, but many things not. Right? We're going to have to see. And there have been a number of misunderstandings. I'm just going to quote a few of them. That totally misquotes it, which Christians and others are very good at. One thing is, they claim Noahide laws is discriminatory. Why? Because it imposes death penalty for Noahide for any transgression of the Torah. Now, even if it would, don't we understand these things are universal? They're not things that are obscure. There are things that destroy society if you don't do them. You don't keep them. So I can understand it's more severe. But there are things that make logical sense. Right? But even so, there are very few transgressions that incur capital punishment. There are 7 categories of transgression for the Noahide law. Meaning about a dozen specific actions that a non-Jew will die for. Give or take. Now, what about Jewish law? So they're going to say, oh, look, non-Jews die like nothing. Like nothing. Like you flick a fly, so to speak. You kill a non-Jew like that. It's not necessarily true. But even if it would be true, you're going to say, why is it so severe? Because they're universal. 100% they're universal. Person can't score them out of it and say, gee, I didn't know. What, you didn't know you weren't allowed to cheat on taxes? Now that's different. Uncle Sam, euthanasia, come on. Put him out of my misery. Yeah, Jewish law has 35 categories, which include capital punishment with over 100 specific transgressions, for which a Jew could be put to death. That's a heck of a lot more than non-Jews, isn't it? And they're only executed by Noahides. Beheading. They get beheaded. Right? Quick is the most painless method of Torah-mandated execution. Someone who desecrates Shabbos, a Jew, desecrates Shabbos on purpose. What's the punishment? Skila. What's skila? They get thrown off a 3-story building. They aim for their loins. That doesn't kill them. They take a big rock, aim for their heart. You know what they say? If the left one doesn't get to, the right one will. By Noahide laws, they don't get that death penalty. That's the most severe, as the rabbis tell. It's the least severe. Jews also can be burned to death, strangled, or stoned, as we mentioned. Those are not given to non-Jews. Also, there are a lot of transgressions for which Jews are punished with 40 lashes. Jews may also receive kares, spiritual excision, or spiritually cut off. Means they die young, or the children die young, or they don't have a portion of the world to come. And the most severe penalty found in the Torah, because that means when you die like a dog. What happens when a dog dies? Poof, nothing. Nothing happens. No portion of the world to come. That's what's going to happen to a Jew if he doesn't repent and he gets spiritually cut off. Non-Jews, do they get lashes? No. They get kares, spiritually cut off? No. So, first misconception that Noahide law, where non-Jews are going to get the death penalty, it's much more than Jews. Not true. Right? It's much harsher in judgment and treatment of Jews and non-Jews. Now, I can say very simply, without all that, we got a lot more laws. Tons of more laws. Right? So it makes sense. We have a lot more laws that we can get the death penalty. Right? That's one thing. Now, will a person, if they transgress the Noahide laws, they're going to be put to death? So we mentioned, when was the death penalty given? It was given in Israel. When the Jews had full sovereignty over the land, and when there was a Sanhedrin. When there was a Jewish Supreme Court. Now, Israel today is in the Jewish hands. Okay, let's raise the flag. Everyone's going to sing the Jewish national anthem. Right? I'll get stoned and feathered by other people. So I want to keep my name clean over here. So, over here in Israel, do we have the temple? No. Is it the level of religiosity that it should be? No. There's no theocratic rulership over here. Doesn't exist. Not only that, but no Sanhedrin. No Sanhedrin, no death penalty. And when's the Sanhedrin going to come back? Right when the Messiah comes. But we don't have the Sanhedrin yet. Right? So if we don't have it, no death penalty. Now, who administers justice over here? Noahides are Jews, right? It was done by non-Jews. It wasn't necessarily done by Jews. Done by non-Jews. And technically speaking, if I saw a non-Jew, bow down to an idol, technically I could take out a gun and kill them if I get away with it. Right? But again, you need a Sanhedrin. Can't do it. So therefore, if Jews are not liable to capital punishment today, then Noahides certainly not going to be liable. So it's clear, Jewish law much more severe. Much more severe than Noahide law. So then the question is, okay, weren't Noahides put to death when the Sanhedrin existed? I don't know, do we have any statistics? Not that I know of. Further, we don't have statistics to show it. However, it can't be more severe than Jewish law. Right? It certainly can't be more severe. Now, the Talmud tells us in Sanhedrin that the court that executed at a rate of one person every 70 years. 1 in 70 years. It's called a murderous court. If that's the case, and they never really killed anyone, even though the laws are set up to show the severity, just because no one got killed necessarily doesn't mean it wasn't a severe transgression. But if that's the case, that one person every 70 years was a frequency beyond the pale of possibility, that means the court was too severe. Now, if that's the case, talking about Jews, what are we going to say about non-Jews? Again, we don't have any statistics, but, this cannot be more, non-Jewish law cannot be more severe than Jewish law. If it can't be more severe than Jewish law, and once every 70 years, then that's another misconception. Isn't a non-Jew put to death for studying Torah? Here's a good question. Isn't a non-Jew allowed to steal? Isn't a Jew allowed to steal from a non-Jew? Isn't a Jew allowed to lie to a non-Jew, but not to another Jew? Isn't a Jew allowed to kill a non-Jew? Isn't a Jew allowed to charge non-Jew interest yet not to another Jew? Now, there are a number of these statements. I dealt with a lot of these also in my videos on Tanakh. But why do they group all together? They grouped all together because they suffer from one very simple problem. They're all assumptions. Right? You know what happens when you assume? I'm not going to quote that. We all know. But it's either based on a mistranslation or they're cherry picking. They're cherry picking. In other words, I'll give one example. It doesn't use this example, but I'll give the example anyway. The Talmud says if a non-Jew is drowning on Shabbos, you don't save him. So people say, see, you don't care about non-Jews, you let them die. You let them drown. But if you look, half a page before, there's a whole discussion in the Talmud how you're allowed to save a Jew on Shabbos. Right? Because the whole question is, you're only allowed to save him. He's going to keep further Shabbos. If he's a secular Jew, technically I shouldn't be able to save him. Maybe you have a fear, maybe you should. Right? That'll be the case. But in general, the question isn't why aren't we allowed to save a non-Jew? And we let the non-Jew die. Oh, too bad. Let him die. Who cares? We're cruel. That's not the question. That's one sentence. But the whole rest of the page, he's talking about how am I allowed to save a Jew? Then it throws in at the end, throws in a bonus. What's the bonus? The bonus is how am I allowed, I'm not allowed to save a non-Jew. But that's not even the question. That wasn't the question over here. So they cherry pick. And they say, see, you're not allowed to save a non-Jew on Shabbos. But you didn't read the whole story. You took it from the end. It's like reading this murder mystery and say, oh, the butler did it. I'm sorry, I just ruined the story. The butler did it. But you didn't read what happened in between. You don't know how it got to that point. And how he got caught and all that. You don't know what happened. So they take things way out of context. Again, some of the things they may not like the answer. Okay. No one has to like the answer. It's too bad. But, if you're going to cherry pick, at least understand what's going on beforehand. And then when you put the piece together, and you put the whole thing together, and you see there are 50 lines, and 49 out of 50 say, hey, how am I allowed to save this Jew? And in what case? And is he really going to keep Shabbos if I save him? And what if there's a doubt? And what if this? All kinds of questions. The last line. The last line says, by the way, you're not allowed to save a non-Jew. So that's not even, we call that in Talmudic literature, we say, Iker Chosamino Sefer. The essence of what's going on is missing. What are you quoting me the last line? You idiot. Quote me the 49 lines before. Show me what it says before. Then when you show me what it says before, then bring in the last line. Don't just bring me the last line. That's called cherry picking. The vernacular. So these allegations, Messianics very good at this. These allegations, 100% long-held anti-Semitic myth, making the rabbis look bad, making Jews in general look bad. That's one of the reasons. Did a whole bunch of shows on Tanakh Talk doing that. Explaining these things, explaining the content. I went through a whole bunch of them. Explaining the content. Now some people go, it's apologetics, it's this, it's that. You say what you want, but you have to understand the context. You don't understand the context, what are you talking about? You just want to make a look bad. I get it. I definitely get it. At the same time, the Talmud, we understand. There are a lot of discussions. A lot of conversations, right, that discuss Torah law. The Talmud does not necessarily represent actual Jewish belief or practice. Why? Because there's a hierarchy. There's a hierarchy over here, right? There are a lot of different opinions. So now you have to understand. You have to look at the early commentators. You have to look at the later commentaries. You got to see. But even if you tell me, Talmud says, isn't a Jew allowed to steal from a non-Jew? Yeah, but what does the Code of Jewish Law say? We don't hold that way. You're not allowed to. You're not allowed to misrepresent. But it brings an opinion that you are allowed to. We don't do it. Oh, but that's what the Talmud said. Okay, do me a favor. Learn how to learn. When you learn how to learn, and you learn hierarchy of how to poskin, right? How to derive Jewish law, give me a call, right? I'll be around to have that conversation. I'm just going to laugh. Because you're going to know, but this means this, it means that. You don't know how to learn. You don't know how to learn. In the world, you're making any statements at all. Because most people know. They don't know, they find out now. There are a lot of conversations, Talmud says. Doesn't mean it's authoritative, doesn't mean that's how we hold. According to Jewish law, sometimes that is the case. But there are a lot of different gradations. There are a lot of details. And if you don't know the details, you can't just quote and say, oh, this is the case. Give one example. And the example is someone quoted the Shulchan Aruch that says single Jewish women are obligated to cover their hair. Now, if you ever lived in a Jewish community, you'll never see a single woman covering her hair. Maybe except in Yemen, just that she's married, so they won't get abused and all that, right? But the person making this video, a non-Jew butchering every Hebrew word, he's going on and on and on, and then he makes this statement. It's true. That's what the Shulchan Aruch says. That's what the Code of Jewish Law says. But you know what? Commentaries give the context. But even without looking at the context, how do I know the person's off their rocket? How do I know they don't know what they're talking about? Even without looking at anything, because I've lived in a Jewish community for 30 years. Any Jewish community, whether it's modern Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, regardless, doesn't matter. In America, South America, here in Israel, different places, I've never seen, a single woman wearing a head cover. Don't if they're married. Now, it could be. Maybe there are some individuals that couldn't even make that statement. So I would always, I butchered this person because if you're going to make a statement on Jewish law and you're going to quote something, understand what you're quoting. Forget about butchering every Hebrew word. So just because that's what the Shulchan Aruch says, the Code of Jewish Law, forget the Talmud over here. That's what the Code of Jewish Law is. Okay, so what's the context? Come on, Joe Schmo, what's the context? Tell me what the context is. Oh, you can't read the context. You don't understand the context because you've never learned. You've never lived in a Jewish community. And if you never lived in a Jewish community, why don't you just shut your big mouth? Just keep it quiet because you don't know what you're talking about. And I bring this up because a little bit of knowledge we mentioned at the beginning, in the preface to the introduction. I mentioned at the beginning because a lot of people out there, they yap. They yap and they can yap very loud. But you know what? The louder they yap, it shows there's more they don't know. And you're going to yell and scream, which I always do. So, that's okay because that's my style. Right? But in general, if you're going to quote something, understand what it says. And understand what the commentaries say. Because I can also read it and tell me that, single women cover their, are obligated to cover their hair. Right? Women are obligated to cover their hair, single or married. Very good. What's context? And is that really true today? Because even without looking at the context, I can tell you that's not true. That doesn't happen. So then what's it talking about? The person's going to tell you, the people. Right? You're not going to be able to make heads and tails out of it. Right? So why say something? I understand. Want to show he knows something, blah, blah, blah. So the church over here is what we're going to end with. The church, for centuries, cherry-picked these statements. And what do they use it for? Propaganda, capital P. They use it for propaganda. And where the conclusive opinions of the Talmud come out, go to Jewish law. That's what we call the Shulchan Aruch. That was compiled by Rabbi Yosef Karo, 1700s. And the Talmud, though, is a methodology to understand. Commentary on the Torah, to understand the law. And they have the right to do that. We have to listen to Kohanim in every generation. They are the rabbis of every generation. So therefore, they have to know, okay, there's a hierarchy. How do we hold? Which commentary do we go like? That's why we have great rabbis of every generation. But you can't cherry pick. That's not fair. I mean, they do it all the time, but that's not fair. They take things totally out of context. So the Shulchan Aruch decides, according to the Talmudic opinion, that prohibits a Jew from stealing, lying, or harming a non-Jew, or letting them drown on Shabbos. So fine, there is a statement, and it does look pretty bad. I would agree. All these statements look pretty bad. But if you don't understand the context, and you just cherry pick, of course it looks bad, and we're going to make the Jewish people look even worse. Because we're going to quote all these things. Then and the Messianics will go to town, and the Christians will go to town, and they're all going to say, oh, look, they hate non-Jews. They look how they oppress non-Jews. They'll steal from them. They'll do all these things, etc. Harm a non-Jew. They'll lie to them. They'll let them drown on Shabbos. Yeah, but if you don't understand the context, again, it does look pretty bad. All right? And there is one statement here, right, that is true, that a Jew is not allowed to charge interest to another Jew. We're allowed to charge to a non-Jew. Right? Very interesting thing. I can go into another time. Right? But, a non-Jew could also charge interest to a Jew. Just not a Jew to a Jew. Right? So what do we see? We see that the Torah is given 613 commandments, 7 laws given to children of Noah. And, Adam and Noah passed down. They apply divide everybody. We don't say, believe in us, you're going to fry in hell forever. It's a divine revelation. The whole purpose of it, that God gave it to us, was to draw closer to him as a Jew and a non-Jew. And the only way we're ever going to do it, the Ramchal says clear in Derech Hashem, is to keep the mitzvah. That's how you draw close. And God forbid you transgress, you do the opposite. You draw yourself away. And again, these laws have not been practiced because of all the persecution. Of all the persecution by the church. And now, more than 1,800 years later, we're living in the lap of luxury. Now these things become what we call Nogei L'Maisa. Now they're practical. Because now there's no persecution. Now they can come out and keep the laws. Who's going to keep the laws? The Jews are getting slaughtered. I don't think so many people. Oh, I want to sign up with them. I want to know what it means to be a non-Jew. You're dead. Next. That's it. It's over. Right? So the fact that's come to the forefront now is also, it's also a proof. One proof that we are in the Messianic era, because now you see one of the ideas of the Messianic era is non-Jews coming to a recognition, to live according to God's law without going through conversion, without going through idolatry. Right? So that I guess will end the introduction. Anyone have any questions on any of that? All right, I guess if there are no other questions, this is going to be the same material. Question coming in. I just mentioned there will be these are going to be similar materials, to what Rabbi Blumenstiel, gave over. But I guarantee you, if you watch his videos in my classes, it's going to be similar material, but it's not going to be given over the same. That I can promise. That I can promise. Somebody did have a question. 1 second. I don't know, if you have trouble with typing, you can just unmute yourself, I guess. Maybe I can do 1 second. Or maybe, Zoroastrianism, okay. Yeah, Zoroastrianism is idolatry. Why is it idolatry? Because multiple deities. Good God, bad God. Right? We attribute the good things to the good God, bad things to the bad God. Right? I would say, by Christianity, they have a problem with Isaiah chapter 45, verse 7. Because over there, what does it say? It says God created evil. Right? God created evil. If God created evil, the Christians have a problem. Why do they have a problem? They have a problem because evil came from Mr. S, fallen angel, which we don't believe in. Right? There is no such thing as a fallen angel. Someone wants to claim that Abrahamic religion is influenced by Zoroastrianism. I don't know where that comes from. I have no idea. There is no bad God over it. God rewards and punishes. We're going to speak about reward and punishment. We may speak about it at length. Exactly how it works. But Judaism has nothing to do with it. You look at Isaiah 45, verse 7, God created evil. Doesn't mean God is evil. Right? The Christians have a problem with that. They mistranslate. So where is evil attributed to the Christians? Mr. S. Right? The Satan, whatever you want to call it. Evil inclination, the angel of death. They have a theological problem, so what do? They mistranslate. 100% they mistranslate. So the question is, how authentic are Jewish scripture? Can I trust the Tanakh? Okay. I will tell you, I have 2 videos. I don't want to go through the whole thing because I don't have time. I have 2 videos. If you Google, if you Google Tanakh Talk, controversial issues, oral law, I have a bunch of tapes. I have a bunch of videos there. I have a few videos. I have about 2 or 3 videos, 4 videos, or more on oral law and how oral law works. That'll answer the question, how authentic are the Jewish scriptures? Can I really trust it? Why is it a big game of telephone? So without going into all the details, there are 2 videos, about an hour each, 2 or 3 videos there. Take a look. Take a look over there. That pretty much answers the question. Since it's taking me too long to go through it, and I have another class soon anyway. So but it's a good question. I mean, this is what we're here for. We're here to help. We're here to answer questions. To the best of our ability. We're not like the Christians. We're allowed to ask questions. We love questions. No question is stupid because people are coming from different biases and different things. So we understand, if a person never learns the Torah with proper commentary, how are they going to understand what it means? So, we relish questions over here. And we're not saying, it's just a leap of faith. There's some things I would definitely say that, God said it, and that's it. We don't have, logical explanation. Maybe we do have some explanation, but, a lot of it has to do with, God said it, we do it. But you have to look at the Torah as a whole. The Torah as a whole, 80% of it rationally does not make sense. Totally doesn't make sense. Right? Now, just by process of deduction, why would a person make a law book of all these minutiae, all this detail, and things that make absolutely no sense? Would have been easier to write a law book, give 10 laws, 15 laws maximum, but make laws that you can do. What are you going to make a law that you can't wear wool and linen together? Where you can't eat fruit after until you plant something after the 3rd year? Or mixing milk and meat and all that. Why would you make laws that are like incomprehensible? People are going to think, why would I keep this? Why would I do it? Now, is that full proof that God wrote the Torah? I'm not saying full proof. There's one aspect. Someone would have made it much easier. Much, much easier. But I will mention one other thing. At a Passover Seder, there was always 4 generations at the Seder: great-grandfather, grandfather, father, and the son. There's an obligation for the father to tell the story to his son. Right now, at one point, that great-grandfather, was the youngest son to get 4 generations. So now, how many of those generations will have to go to Mount Sinai? 80. That's not so much, right? I have a great aunt, 95 years old. She should be well. So imagine she was, 5 years old at a Passover Seder, and she saw her great-grandfather, right? She saw her great-grandfather, let's say 80 years ago, right? 80 years ago, so here in the, early 1900s, let's say. But that great-grandfather was also a child, right? When he was a child, so his great-grandfather goes 70 years back, 80 years back, right? So now you're talking mid-1800s, right? Sorry, 1900s. Sorry, 1800s, right? So now you don't need that many generations, but everyone who sits at a Passover Seder, every Jew, on 15th of Nisan, you're going to have 3 matzahs, 4 cups of wine, cup for Elijah the prophet, rosette, maror or bitter herbs are all the same. So it's a big game of telephone. Boy, aren't we lucky? We must be so lucky. One event in history. The Torah tells me, Jews came out of Egypt. A lot of mitzvahs come from the Jews coming out of Egypt. So if there are a lot of mitzvahs that the Jews came out of Egypt that we do, we have a mezuzah, talks about the Jews coming out of Egypt. We got, tefillin, phylacteries, whatever you want to call them, Jews coming out of Egypt. Got many things. Many things. One event in history. Oh, how do I know it's true? How do I know what happened if my father told me the story? Even a watered-down story. How did he know? How did he know it was true? Because his father told him the story. And his father told him the story. Normally, a father's not going to lie to his son. Maybe not in this generation. But a father's not normally going to lie to his son. Right? So that was passed down orally. But not only was it passed down, not orally. It was passed down generation to generation. It's passed down generation to generation. You can't make something like that up. How can you make that up? It's one event in history. Major thing that God intervened in Jewish history. And if that's the case, you can say, how do I know it's a fact? Because my father told me. He told me the story. when I was a kid. He told me the story. How did he know the story? Because his father told him the story. How did his father know the story? So he's going back now 150 years. And then you go back another 150 years before that. It's not so far to go back to Mount Sinai, right? So that's just one idea why it's not a big game of, in general, why it's not a big game of, fellowship. Yeah. Any other? Any other questions or general questions? All right. I guess there's no other questions. Then I'm going to sign out. It was a lot of fun. We'll do this, I guess. Here's Hashem. God's help next week. Anyone has any questions, by the way, during the week, they can send them to put up my email address. They can send it to Rabbi Chaim Coffman @gmail.com. Do my best to back to you. Anyone wants to speak about anything, by the time, I definitely be more than happy. Otherwise, I'm going to sign out. Ray, always a pleasure. It was a lot of fun. We'll continue this, I guess, next week. So, wishing everyone a good, I guess, middle of the day for me, almost the end of the day. And everyone have a great week.